Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a truly brilliant paradigm shift from Professor T. Takasugi. We're going to tackle a fascinating, honestly kind of frustrating question. Why do conventional therapeutic breakthroughs sometimes just completely stall out? We're starting with a paradox that any mental health professional knows entirely too well. Just picture this. You've got a client who executes cognitive behavioral therapy perfectly. They diligently do the thought records, they pinpoint their cognitive distortions, they even generate those perfectly balanced alternative thoughts. And yet, the intellectual insight brings absolutely zero emotional relief. Nothing. Or how about the client who's completely mastering acceptance and commitment therapy? They practice cognitive diffusion like a pro. They totally understand their core values. But the second they actually try to practice acceptance of a genuinely unwanted outcome, they just panic. They shut down completely, saying things like, I understand I should accept this, but I literally can't. So that brings us to the central mystery we are unpacking today. Why exactly does therapy sometimes fail, even when the patient does everything exactly right? I mean, why do these highly effective, evidence-based tools suddenly hit a brick wall for certain people, even when they're putting in maximum effort?
Part 1. The hidden assumption, a structural flaw. To solve this puzzle, we really have to look at the invisible foundation that brilliant models like CBT, ACT, and the ABC model are all built upon.
Now, don't get me wrong, these established models are undeniably fantastic. CBT evaluates thought accuracy beautifully. ACT shifts our relationship to our own thoughts, and the ABC model effectively disputes those irrational must beliefs. They are incredible, proven tools for emotional regulation, and we rely on them because, well, they work incredibly well for a lot of people. But here's the catch. The crucial point is that they all quietly presuppose a foundational rule. They assume the client actually has multiple futures that remain psychologically available to them. Essentially, they assume you have an open scenario field with a variety of imaginable paths you can comfortably choose from or move toward. But what happens when that core assumption just completely breaks down? Enter what Professor Takasugi calls ontological collapse. This is a structural issue where the future possibility space itself forecloses. Reality essentially collapses into a single demanded path, which makes any alternative future literally unthinkable. They aren't just being stubborn or avoiding other paths, they are completely, genuinely blind to them. Part 2. The RFC model explained. We're going to dive into this structural approach using Professor Takasugi's reality foreclosure conflict framework to map out what's really happening beneath the surface. So the RFC model maps it out like this. R stands for reality, which naturally contains multiple paths. F is foreclosure, which is where the mind unconsciously commits to just one single outcome, maybe a very specific career or a particular relationship, and eliminates all other options. Finally, C is the conflict. This is the massive, grinding existential friction that happens when a singular, rigid mind crashes into a plural reality that absolutely refuses to comply. And this right here invites a massive, fascinating paradigm shift. It begs a really provocative question. What if cognitive distortions aren't the actual problem, but just a symptom? What if our so-called faulty reasoning is actually perfectly logical, given that the person is operating inside a collapsed reality? Part 3, symptoms versus structure, a new perspective. Let's flip standard psychology on its head for a second and see how we often misdiagnose this structural collapse as mere cognitive errors. Think about catastrophizing. In standard CBT, that's a cognitive error you need to correct, right? You tell the client, hey, losing your job isn't the end of the world. But under the RFC model, if losing that job genuinely feels like the end of your existence because literally no other future is imaginable to you, then predicting job loss isn't catastrophizing at all. It is a highly accurate, totally logical assessment of a collapsed world. The same thing happens with experiential avoidance. What ACT might label as unnecessarily avoiding difficult thoughts could actually be something much deeper. RFC calls it ontological defense. Basically, it's a desperate, completely rational defense mechanism to protect the absolute last livable world the person feels they can survive in. They aren't just avoiding a bad feeling, they are quite literally defending their existence. Which leads to this absolutely brilliant observation from Professor Takasugi. Must thinking is not the engine of suffering. It is the smoke that tells us a fire has already started elsewhere. So when someone insists, I must succeed, that's not the root cause of their pain. It's actually a glaring linguistic signal. It's smoke showing us that all other alternatives have completely vanished from their mental map. Part 4, Reopening the Future, Restoring Possibility. Now that we know all this, how do we actually treat this underlying structural mismatch without invalidating the patient's lived experience? Well, we use a process called ontological scenario restoration, or OSR. Takasugi calls this alternative archaeology, which I just love. It's an investigative approach where the goal is to gently excavate the timeline and find out exactly when other life paths became unthinkable. The focus here is on restoring cognitive existence, just purely making these alternatives imaginable again. And to be super clear, this is not exposure therapy. We aren't demanding emotional acceptance of a terrible outcome. We're literally just making it thinkable again. To really wrap your head around this, think of it as an architectural relationship. The ABC model and CBT, they repair the furniture inside the room. They help you think better within a given space. But RFC and OSR, they reopen the locked doors to other rooms. So OSR isn't competing with traditional therapy. It's simply unlocking those doors so traditional therapy actually has a spacious room to work in. This distinction gets crystal clear when we put these approaches side by side. Traditional models like CBT and ACT target cognitive accuracy. They intervene to refine your thinking inside a specific world, taking the stance of a rational corrector. But the RFC and OSR models target ontological availability. They intervene to restore the possibility space itself, taking the stance of a collaborative investigator to figure out what kinds of worlds we can even permit to exist. So, how does this actually translate into practice? It builds into a unified clinical staging. Step 1 has to be OSR. You absolutely must restore the alternative scenarios first. Make them imaginable. Only then can you move to Step 2, which is your CBT or ACT. You have to reopen the field before you can effectively challenge thoughts within it. If you try to skip straight to Step 2, that's exactly when the therapy stalls out. I just absolutely love this profound takeaway. CBT addresses what we think within a given world. OSR restores the world in which thinking can occur. It perfectly emphasizes that alleviating deep, stubborn psychological suffering isn't just about intense cognitive effort. It is about achieving a perceptual restoration of a spacious reality. It's about realizing the map is so much bigger than you originally thought. Which brings us to our conclusion. I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder as you look at your own life. What becomes possible when we realize reality itself is more spacious than we thought? Seriously, think about it. How might your own persistent struggles shift if you realized the map of your future wasn't a dead end, but simply missing a few branches? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks for exploring this fascinating model with me today.